Hey everybody, welcome back to You Are Free TV. It is Friday, October 31st, 2025, and I'm so glad to be back with you. TGIF, it is Halloween, and so I've got the perfect show lined up for that. And I'm so sorry I haven't been here for the last couple days, but I just want to say a few things before I get into the fantastic interview that I have coming up here with Leo Zagami to talk about his incredible new book. The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster. And we'll get into the subtitle, and I'll leave you on a hook there for a second before we get in with Leo, but it's going to be very exciting here. And it really talks about the real evil and the real horrors, okay, behind Halloween. And to that note, I want to talk about, just to remind everybody, these are the high satanic holidays out there, and there's a lot of children and adults suffering and persecuted during this time. And so it's so important to really, really focus your prayers, right? The prayer of St. Michael, or the prayer of just whatever you do, whatever is your particular genre of connecting with Jesus Christ for the full armor and safety. And I also want to suggest that you might want to go see this great new documentary that's out called The Triumph Over Evil. And it is a fantastic documentary about exorcism, and specifically brings in how Mother Mary is used in exorcisms and all this incredible stuff with some really famous exorcists out there. So that's been showing up in theaters this week. So I wanted to let people know you could go and check that out. I also wanted to bring to your attention that has just come out from Del Bigtree. We're going to be talking a lot about reversals in this interview, inversion, what it means to get back to we'll be talking about Zapatine Frankism and how it created this, economy of sin in our present day, and the history of Epstein in relation to that, and that whole, cult of the bribed and mind controlled, and the people willingly going into this sort of economy of sin in order for gain and prestige and wealth and power. And so I wanted to just mention Del Bigtree because he just came out with this incredible new documentary called an inconvenientstudy.com. And this is all about how they already have the proven study that already came out showing vaccinated kids versus unvaccinated kids, and that the unvaccinated kids are, like 99.99% massively more healthy than any vaccinated child. And it's already out there. It just came out. You can go to an inconvenientstudy.com and check that out, and get out there and support Del Bigtree for his incredible work. It's like a fight to the, it's an intense fight now. They're really trying to purge out RFK's picks in the HHS, and we need you to get in that fight and show support. And I just want to also say, as the SNAP benefits are being shut off here tomorrow and into November with the devil rat shutdown, I just want to say, this for not everybody is multi-generational, welfare dependent person, okay, that relies on SNAP. There's so many good people during the incredible destruction of our economy in the last under Biden, and the controlled demolition that we've all been through. So many people really are, going to be suffering hugely. Everyone dependent. But I just want to say, go out there, throw some potlucks, with fellows, with friends, with neighbors. Try to make it, so much food for the soul counts for food in the belly too, that it really makes a difference when people hear that you care, that you're thinking of them, and that you want to give them a nice meal, you want them to come over for dinner, and just coming up with creative new ways. So many people have preserved food for times like this, and so get out there and share it. Okay, now we're going to bring in Leo. Thanks so much for listening to all those, and I'll come back at the end of the video and we'll talk about a few more things. There's just been so much news, but we've got to get Leo in here because he is under demand right now with this incredible book that's about to become another bestseller, I am sure. Let me bring him in here. Hey, Leo, welcome back to the show.
Always a pleasure, always a pleasure. And of course, always a pleasure when I have a new book that I can present to your audience, which I know is eager to have food for their thought and for their awareness. In this case, as you know, it's going to be an incredible journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, we have so much going on. I think it's especially poignant. So the full title of the book is The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, Exposing... exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world. Okay, and and when I put you on full solo layout, you can hold it up again and people can see
Yeah.
it even clearer. But so that book is available right now, and I will link it below for people to buy it. I'm sure it's going to be another bestseller and hitting the top of the charts. And you didn't go as full, like three sentences long in this title like you do sometimes. This one's kind of short by comparison to your other titles, which I
I
love.
guess the
I
things
love
have
how you
changed.
do that. It's like you do like 19th century titles, which I love. The
No,
law.
but the thing is that this is the first book after the end of my Confessions of an Illuminati series. Is the beginning of a new, let's say, path for me, literary path, which is not relying only on my own experiences, but also it's the product, of course, of my work as an investigative journalist, as an expert in certain fields, in this case, theology, anthropology, and of course, history. Because for the first time, I wanted to bring out a subject that is so overly discussed that it becomes almost like futile or useless for the majority of people to purchase a book about Jeffrey Epstein. Why are you doing a book about Jeffrey Epstein when there has been thousands of articles, hundreds of books? Well, because nobody has brought out this particular perspective, and my thesis is unique. That's why I'm really happy to be able to present it to your audience, especially today. You know, you said this is the day in which, of course, you know, a bit like Anton LaVey said, you let your kids going towards the occult and Satan, almost like, you know, because it is, of course, this over commercialization of the occult, which we notice in Halloween and in this date, which is October 31st, which, however, has roots which are instead very much sacred when we are discussing All Saints, when we are discussing the fact that people are very much connected to their afterlife. So,
Well, let me interject real quick, and that's what I was saying earlier, the inversion, and that is so much to do with what you're about to get into with Frankism and Zapatian Frankism and the using inversion to basically corrupt everything that's good, and to put that on a pedestal to basically make an excuse to be able to be disgusting, right? I mean, but hold on
I
one
will say
second.
one
Just give
thing
me.
that this, before you go on. You know,
Okay.
we discussed many times the way they have corrupted Christianity,
Yeah.
but I guess that is more difficult for non-Jews to instead also do the same when it regards to Judaism. So please go on. But I mean, that I wanted to say.
Yes, it happens in every society, actually. But there is a certain situation here to do with massive amounts of power and wealth that have gone along with this particular sect and cult. And you know, you have people like Norman Finkelstein calling out, you know, who's one of his parents survived Auschwitz, and he's a prominent political scientist. He's out there saying, hey, you know, whatever you want to say, like the Gaza genocide does show this class of billionaire Jews that are together in a you know, in a cabal, you know, doing
In
this and
what I
destroy,
have
you know,
defined in my
it's
book as a banking cartel, which
right,
has been
right,
established in places like Frankfurt, out of all
yes,
places, which was a bastion that met the power, that was like a crossroads between the Illuminati, the Christian nobility, and at the same time the Sabbatean Frankists with Jacob Frank, who arrives in Frankfurt, received like he was some kind of God on earth at that point, because he was accepted by his followers as a messiah. Now,
right. Hold on one second, because you're about to take it all away, and then you're not gonna see me for a few minutes because I want to hear your whole thing. I just want to say a couple more things and then have you jump right in, because we have, of course, the whole situation here that's also gone down with Charlie Kirk and the murder of Charlie Kirk. And so, you know, and Josh Hammer coming out and saying that Tucker Carlson should be eliminated. I want people who are watching these watching right now to know this is me talking. This has nothing to do with Leo and his new book. This is me just saying that we're still going through this whole situation of dealing with these power struggles that Leo's about to talk about in this Cabal network, in a sect that has to do with, Satanism. And so we're going to, I'm going to hand it over to you, Leo, to talk about, just bring us right in. What's your new book? And, and how happy are we that now Andrew is the Duke of Nowhere?
Well,
He's the Duke of Nowhere.
Yeah, but
And he's like kicked out of the house, right? Kicked out of the
he
world.
might be sent to some remote castle or, out
Probably
of
back to Transylvania, right?
But regardless of that, remember that he will always claim by his birthright his title of prince. I mean, of course, they took officially his title of duke, his title of prince, and all that. But he will basically claim it within his own household. Now, everybody could claim that. You could be the princess or the king of whatever in your own home, or the queen of whatever. I could be the same. So that restricts a little bit what the damage that Andrew can do publicly when he will be restricted to His Royal Highness within his own quarters. Now, his own quarters might be in this remote castle that the Queen Mother purchased in the 1950s. It's north of Scotland, very remote. And it's a place in which they have constructed also bed and breakfast in recent times, but it's a nice castle. It's not but of course, it's really at the end of the world, meaning the king is sending him right, totally away from the public eye. Having said that, the whole story that Virginia Giuffre, of course, has spoken of in a posthumous memoir, makes us realize that the guy he couldn't keep on being this public figure within the royal family, but he couldn't even be marginalized and kept still with these titles because.
Well, you're going to bring that up probably in a sort of timeline here, right? Are you going to talk about the royals in the context of your book and the Frankists and
it's
all
very
of it?
important for the context
absolutely.
of my book, the fact that Jacob Frank at one point, his followers were brought to the realization that instead of just marrying within each other, within what their heresy claimed was the Edom, so these converts to the Catholic faith or to the Christian faith in general, who simply married with each other, but they were former Jews, they understood that instead, by embracing, for example, first of all, the Catholic nobility, and later on the Anglican, the Church of England nobility, which started to see now people like the Rothschilds marrying with the English nobles, and then it is basically a way for this sect to infiltrate the elite families, and they actually embrace their surnames, because Jacob Frank followers devised this thing of embracing the surname of the person who baptized them in the Christian faith. So at that point, you don't know anymore who is Christian, who is Jew, who is this and that.
Right. Well, look, Leo, let's back up, and you just go in and start from the go of how you talk about what this book is.
Okay,
and
so
I'm going to let you talk.
Which you see here is a book that I have just published, and it's not part of the Confessions of an Illuminati series, like we stated, but definitely it's a book that sees a different perspective to the whole Jeffrey Epstein affair and saga, because it goes into the actual backgrounds, the background which is religious, which is historical, of, for example, Jeffrey Epstein family, the Epstein, the Stokowski family, but also Ghislaine Maxwell family, because the father was a hawk, which is also another important family from the areas. All this is like Eastern Europe, in those areas that we now, of course, the borders have changed. But back in the days, we had the Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth, we had Podolia. These were places of great influence for the Jesuits, who then became also places affected by what we know as the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, which is an heresy born within Judaism. Now, the Jews never accepted Jesus, and so they're still waiting for their Messiah. And in the 17th century, suddenly this guy came up called Shabbatai Zevi, who claimed he was this Messiah, and he gave birth to this Sabbatean current that then was later embraced by Jacob Frank, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi a century earlier, and then brought this heresy from, let's say, the Islamic area where it first manifested in the Ottoman Empire into the Habsburg monarchy of Austria and the Russian Empire. And all these areas, you see, Podolia, it's a region which we have as part of Podolia, the Kingdom of Galicia, the Golden Horde, the Kingdom of Poland, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And the Jews who were living in these areas were the ancestors of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And so,
aren't they, isn't that area is very much, so many people in the current power structure are from those areas. That's just truth. I mean, when you look at, that's, I mean, the whole Ukraine situation, all of these modern things, there's something about that area and these people you're talking about. And could you let people know what that heresy is when you're going to talk about Frankism, like describe what it is so that people know?
Okay, so Shabbatai Zevi was...
in years, in the timeline.
Yes, the years, of course, we start from the 17th century. So we start from Shabbatai Zevi, who was a guy who himself, though, was the product of something which I'm going to describe in this book, and that, of course, goes right to the roots of Zionism, which, contrary to what most people think, is not a Jewish creation.
Right.
It's actually a creation by the Puritan Christians. So just so we start defining, Shabbatai Zevi, who was active through the Ottoman Empire, was born in the year 1626 and died in 1676. His father, though, was Mordecai Zevi. Mordecai Zevi was a representative for an English merchant company of Puritans from the Oliver Cromwell days. Mm-hmm. And Oliver Cromwell has sent his best emissaries to Menachet ben Israel, who was a very known rabbi, a guy who opened the first printing house for the Jews in the Netherlands, in modern-day Holland. And he was somebody who was sort of inspirational because for these people. But I go and dig even deeper than him. But any case, just to make a long story short, because people, of course, can read the book for the details, Mordecai Zevi, influenced by the English, who themselves, the Puritans, wanted the Jews to go back to Israel. And the reason is the same reason that is given today by Christian Zionists. And the reason is, we need to bring back the people of Israel to their country, to their nation, to their promised land, because only in that way we will have manifested the scriptures, and the end times will manifest with the return of the Messiah, the return for us Christians, but the coming of the Messiah for the Jews who never accepted Jesus in the first place. So Mordecai Zevi was somebody who knew all these things, transmitted it to his son, and his son, who then gave birth to the Sabbatean movement, declared himself to be the Messiah of the Jews once he was convinced to do so by another incredible figure who was even more incredible because he was based in Gaza, Nathan of Gaza. So we start to see things that, start to make sense here. So this Nathan of Gaza convinced Shabbatai Zevi that his visions were the correct visions, that he was the Messiah, that he had to declare himself. he went to the rabbinical council in Jerusalem. Initially, he was embraced, but then he was rejected. And so he went to Gaza, and that's where they started to call all the Jewish tribes back to Israel so they could embrace this new Messiah, Shabbatai Zevi. Shabbatai Zevi at the time became a phenomenon of immense proportion within the Jewish world. What does it mean? It means that at that time, more than half of the Jews living in the world accepted him as a Messiah.
Wow.
But then the Sultan, the head of the Ottoman Empire, heard about this guy from Izmir. Izmir is modern day Izmir. It was called Smyrna, who is that is a town in Turkey. Heard about this guy and what he was saying, and he had him arrested. He threatened him. He said, "I'm going to have you killed if you don't convert to Islam." So in 1666, which is also a very important, date for Christians, 666, the in reality, something really anti-Christian manifested, because Shabbatai Zevi converted to Islam, and at that point, of course, 3/4 of the people who support, more than 3/4, I would say that we are talking about probably 80% of the people who supported them abandoned them. They said, this guy is a fraud. If you are the Messiah of the Jews, you can't convert to Islam. It just doesn't make any sense. But there was a minority that didn't. And that minority started giving birth to a movement that went underground. And it was the Dome. The Dome were the crypto Jews who outwards had embraced Islam, but in reality continued their Jewish practices, their heretical Jewish practices. And so if you ask me, what are these heretical Jewish practices, where Shabbatai Zevi was perverting and the meaning even of those Kabbalistic practices taught by Lurianic Kabbalah, and he was promoting the idea that through the practice of sin, of sexual magic, sharing your wives, eating pork on holy days, everything that the Jewish law prohibits, he will embrace and make it his own. And so you understand that this is really something that started to worry the rabbinical system. Let's say that at that point, when the rabbis around Europe started to hear about what was happening, they started to be pretty worried. Initially, though, you see, because Shabbatai Zevi was embraced as the Messiah, there was an initial period, and he was embraced as the Messiah simply because at that time there was a lot of talk about a Messiah. Why there is this connection with Oliver Cromwell? Oliver Cromwell was the guy who led the Jews back to England after a few centuries. They had been banned from England. Okay, Oliver Cromwell was the guy who chopped the head, who got the king to lose his head for real. He chopped. The king was beheaded, and for a brief time, England was a republic. England and some areas that now, Wales, Scotland, the areas that were called the English Commonwealth at the time, I think it was called. But it was a brief experiment that lasted with Oliver Cromwell and it ceased with his son. Then the monarchy, of course, was back in action in Great Britain. But Oliver Cromwell was the one who let the Jews back in. They had been banned for a few centuries from England. They were nowhere to be seen. They were actually they were deemed as a danger. So, Manasseh ben Israel, this Jewish thinker, who was called the ambassador of the Jews, was called then by Oliver Cromwell after he had met with all his various representatives. And after this important meeting between Cromwell and him, at that point, the Jews were let back into England. But the idea of Manasseh ben Israel was that the Jews had to be let into England first and then back to Israel. Here is the very basis also of the Zionism, because the Puritans had the same idea, but in a different concept. I mean, their concept wasn't necessarily to embrace Judaism, but to lead the Jews back to Israel, because that will manifest the prophesied end times. So,
in what year were we talking here, Leo?
Here we are talking about early 1600s. We are talking about the early 1600s. We are talking about a period in which John Sadler was the known Scottish Calvinist minister and millennium thinker who became then the secretary of Oliver Cromwell. He became very close to the ambassador of the Jews, to this guy called Manasseh ben Israel. And there is all kinds of connections here that, of course, I don't want to anticipate too much to not ruin, to spoil the book for those who will read it. But it's all connected. It's all connected because you have then Queen Christina, the one that was converted by the Jesuits and brought back to Rome. And they're all connected. You will see that all these figures, they're all connected. So the Jesuits also have very important say, because Manasseh ben Israel in reality was inspired by another figure who had published a very influential book that stands at the heart of Zionism and became very important. The idea, of course, it wasn't yet known as Zionism, but it was to bring back the Jews, because the Jews didn't want to necessarily go back to Israel. And let me tell you, my book shows that up until the 1930s, they didn't want to go back to Israel, most Jews. They were forced. The transfer agreement that was sealed between the Nazis and the Zionists in after 1933.
Yes.
So the transfer agreement is really that monstrosity when it starts taking place. People today, don't know much about these things. They don't want to maybe study them. But the transfer agreement was this very important moment for Jews, because, you see, in my book, everything will be made clear. The foundation of the B'nai Brit, the lodges that came in with the B'nai Brit that finally welcomed the Jews in a kind of a paramasonic kind of concept, which was constructed by those German Jews who had been prohibited to join Freemasonry. So the first experiment that the Jews did to open up to Freemasonry was actually conducted by a direct relative of Jacob Frank, Moses Dobruska, known also with many other names, Schomfeld, Julius Frey. He had many names. He ended up after being killed, but he was very influential in the very early days of the French Revolution. So you see the Sabbatean Frankists being involved with the French Revolution, the Russian revolutions, because there was more than an attempt, the financing that brought down the Tsar with the Schiff family. You have the Sabbatean Frankists being involved with a number of things that one at the end says, wow, this is very impressive. Now, we reconnect everything to Jeffrey Epstein, so to make it more clear.
Well, so give us Frank for a second. Zero in on Frank for a minute, right? Yeah. And then maybe boost up from there into the second half hour here into the Epstein connection.
Sure. Jacob Frank, and that is inspiration also for Frankenstein. It's not like Frankenstein, the novel by Mary Shelley, was inspired, yes, by an alchemist who had a castle experiment, but also by Jacob Frank. And this is made very clear because the actual name Frankenstein has also an esoteric meaning for the Sabbatean Frankists. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Frankenstein, where did he go to school? Question. Answer: Ingolstadt, the university where they founded the Illuminati. Okay? Yep. And the Illuminati had some of the most powerful lodges where? In Frankfurt. In Frankfurt, we had the development of this group known as the Asiatic Brethren, and the modern emanation of all this pro-Israel lobby that manifested in more recent times is, of course, the Jewish group, the study group known as the Mega Group with the Les Wexner that was founded in the early 90s. But before that, of course, we have Donald Barr. Donald Barr is a Catholic, was a Catholic, but after he was a Jew. I went and researched his family, where he came from, and I discovered that he was a Sabbatean Frankist.
Well, that seems clear because he wrote that book, Space Relations,
which
right?
is basically picking up on all those lessons from the Sabbatean Frankists, which are lessons in transgression, in perversion, in everything.
Sex abuse,
we have
and
even
child
a figure
sacrifice.
that resembles Ghislaine Maxwell, very sadomasochistic, very sadic in their ways, and the way that they are pedophile, and even if they are cosmic pedophiles in a more kind of a sci-fi space context, it's quite shocking that the father of William Barr, the future head of the DOJ, was involved in all this, and the guy who was actually there when Epstein didn't kill himself.
Yeah, the last person to see Epstein alive is Bill Barr, right?
So this book is the first and only book, to my knowledge, that gives you the entire background of all these figures. Because, then you have, of course, Les Wexner, Charles Bronfman, Edgar Bronfman, Max Fischer, Michael Steindart, Leonard Abramson, Harvey Mainhoff, Lawrence Tirsch, Leston Crown, Marvin Lander, Ronald Lauder, Steven Spielberg. All these people are part of a group that then Les Wexner kind of put together in the early 90s to support what he had built with for Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein is a creation of somebody. But when, in the last few years, I always heard this occurring thing, Jeffrey Epstein, who is behind him? Maybe the intelligence community. Oh, yes, the elite was somehow protecting him, but we can't really access this kind of information. So we are limited in what we know about Jeffrey Epstein. So in the end, it's like all the journalists, all the hundreds of authors, thousands of articles, hundreds of books, but we don't know who was there. Because, yes, you can, of course, say he was working with Mossad, he was working with MI6, he was working with the CIA, he was working with the FBI, but why? And who gave him a building in the most posh area in New York, rigged with, built with cameras, microphones, and things? You think Alex Wexner was not investing in his future when he simply gave him the power of attorney on everything? It's obvious that Jeffrey Epstein is not the product of Jeffrey Epstein, but is the product of something else. And so when I made this book and this cover, it's very symbolic of Jeffrey Epstein, constructed a little bit like the Frankenstein monster by Dr. Frankenstein. So he's both the mad scientist, because Jeffrey Epstein was a mad scientist in his spare time when he was not having sex with minors. But he was. And he was also, at the same time, the guy who was a product of his ancestry, of his culture. And that is what the journalists have left out. They leave it out for a simple reason, and I tell you why. Because still today, the majority of Jewish academics doesn't want to discuss the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, and at the same time, the rabbinical schools don't want to discuss the Sabbatean Frankist. And they don't want to discuss the Sabbatean Frankist also in the academic world, because those liberal universities, when they discuss the Sabbatean Frankist, they actually discuss it with positive notes, like, the university in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem, they would say, yes, well, they were very influential towards the birth of Jewish feminism or labor Zionism or those socialist principles which made Israel so great. No, it's not great. is actually destroying the legacy of the Mosaic laws and embracing what then became that monstrosity that we call Reform Judaism, which is today in the United States, 80% of Jews are connected to Reform Judaism. The other percentage left there is the one that is maybe practicing Hasidic Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, which itself, the Hasidic Jews were born, like Gershon Scholem, one of the major Jewish historians, proven, out of a reaction from Sabbatean Frankist heresy. The Sabbatean Frankist heresy became so pervasive, so insidious within the Jewish communities, especially in Eastern Europe, where Hasidic Judaism then took shape, because, there is Ashkenazi rabbis who actually waged war from the very early stages of Shabbatai Zevi. They saw what Shabbatai Zevi was doing. They saw how Sabbatianism was infiltrating the Jewish communities, making rabbis swap their wife with other, things that were out of this world. You see, if today the majority of Jews in America is either secularized and atheist, or is following some progressive synagogue and some progressive rabbi, is because of the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. And you cannot, like Rabbi Antelman, the later Rabbi Antelman said, there should be only one form of Judaism. And that is the Mosaic laws that were brought down by Moses, and you should only believe in those. When you start cherry picking, I want to believe in this one. No, I'm not going to believe necessarily in this one. What kind of Jew are you?
Yeah.
So my book is not about criticizing a whole race and falling into the trap of anti-Semitism. It's about giving you the understanding that the worst enemy of the Jews are the Jews, like my friend Rosambar said. And I remember when she said that, we were doing a podcast during the pandemic together, and I asked, but why? And then she explained me. And I said, yeah, it makes sense. It's true. The worst enemy of the Jews are the Jews. Wasn't Adolf Hitler of Jewish origin? Wasn't Adolf Hitler actually, like Rabbi Antelman stated, a product of a Sabbatean Frankist ritual in 1888 that gave birth to him? And it makes sense then, that you have in all this a guy who in April 2008, a month before he is actually going to be condemned for a very sweetheart deal that he worked out with the authorities, Jeffrey Epstein goes to Israel. Ooh, Jeffrey Epstein goes to Israel. And of course, everybody is going to say, Jeffrey Epstein, Mossad, Jeffrey Epstein, Shin Bet, Jeffrey Epstein. When the Mossad works for the Sabbatean Frankists, the MI6 works for the Sabbatean Frankists, the CIA works for the Sabbatean Frankists. The White House, unfortunately, the executive power, both Bill Clinton and Trump, demonstrate that the Sabbatean Frankist reach is everywhere. And that you arrive to a certain level, and even Trump, at that point, knows that there is no putting into discussion people who are at the heart of the banking cartel. Because, yes, of course, the common folk would say Rothschild. And, of course, Rothschild, I confirm. Rothschild, Salomon Rothschild, Vienna was fueled by Sabbatean Frankist ideals, and his grandfather, of course, founded this powerful dynasty that, of course, then embraced Sabbatean Frankism in Frankfurt. But then you have many other families and people who are not really known by the common folk, people who the majority would say, who is this guy? But when in May of this year, a gentleman, which I'm going to show you now, arrived to the Oval Office, Donald J. Trump said, he is the representative of a very powerful dynasty. And everybody said, who is this guy? John Elkann. Go and check the history of Elkan that goes all the way way back to Worms, where the magic of Abramelin was, and also all the way back to Frankfurt. The Elkan family is the family that has taken over the Agnelli family. There is still a dispute, a legal dispute at the moment within the family, because the Elkans, who descend from one of the most influential rabbinical families, literally took over the Agnelli empire built on Fiat. Then, of course, now he's the chairman of Ferrari. All the automobile industry today, Stellantis owns Chrysler, everything. Right. And it's this guy, the head. And nobody knows who is this guy.
Interesting.
You know?
Well, it establishes so much when everybody always says, who's they you're talking about? Yeah. Who's the they, right? Sure. And the they are the people behind the scenes, and they are the extremely, extremely powerful, wealthy people behind the scenes. They're not the faces out front.
You see, the work that I've done in this book is to actually go into the Jeffrey Epstein black books. There is 2 of them, and pick up those names that nobody's discussing. Those names that connect the black aristocracy, the English Anglican royalty and aristocracy, the Sabbatean Frankists. They're all there. But nobody, of course, said, who is this guy? I don't know who is this guy. I want to show you another guy. If I find his image here, it will be of help for our discussion here. This painting here with a nice compass and a square. Yeah. And people say, who is this guy? Dr. Falk, the rabbi who became inspirational for Count Cagliostro, the head of the Illuminati, for Swedenborg, who became, one of the most influential figures. He was a Sabbatean, Frankist. And
not surprising.
On top of that, you have, of course, people that are known to Judaism, like the principal name in Reformed Judaism, Moses Mendelssohn. Mm-hmm. I mean, here we're talking about the basis of that monstrosity that today we call communism. Yeah. When we see this guy here, the Jewish philosopher who introduced Karl Marx to communism, Sabbatean Frankist. Mm-hmm. His name, Moses S. Yeah. But people, they don't want to really dig deep, and it's like generalizing and kind of often saying, okay, the Khazarians, there is no such thing as the Khazarians. In this book, I explain with modern DNA studies and everything, the Khazarians simply embraced Judaism because they didn't want to embrace Christianity or Islam. So they found themselves in the middle, but it doesn't make them Jews. And so it creates a lot of confusion because the Khazarians were based in that area, let's say towards, the areas where the then Sabbatean Frankists operated on, they always say, the Khazarians. And the Khazarians became these popular conspiracies that, oh yes, the world is dominated by the Khazarians. Then there is no real Jews, the Khazarians. No, guys, it's a little bit more complex than that, and it's too easy to generalize.
Yeah.
But in the end, Jeffrey Epstein was blessed by a pope. Right. That pope was Polish, and Poland was at the heart of the Sabbatean Frankists. Because you were telling me earlier to explain a little bit better about Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank was brought up when he was a child as a Sabbatean. His father, actually his uncle, was investigated by the rabbinical authorities that would then give always all the information to the people in the Catholic or Protestant countries that they were living, and they will definitely persecute them. So they were forced into leaving modern-day Ukraine and Poland, where they were established. And then they went to Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki was the hotspot of the Sabbateans, where Baruch Russo had claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi. There would be a trio, let's say a trinity of reincarnation of the Messiah that started with Shabbatai Zevi, Baruch Russo, and then Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank arrives in Thessaloniki very young. He sees the rituals of the Sabbateans, he's intrigued by it, and then he manifests itself and says, well, I am the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi. And they accept him.
Right.
But rather,
and what year is this? Let people know, just so they have an...
Well, that is basically at the beginning of the 17th century, when Jacob Frank is very young and starts his... Jacob Frank, like I said, is... 17th century character, like Shabbatai Zevi was instead a 18th century character. He was in the 70s. He was born in 1726. Shabbatai Zevi was born in 1626. So you can see that he thought he was the reincarnation because he was born exactly 100 years later. These were the early 1700s, so I would say that we're talking about the 1740s, 1750s, when he started to really see himself as the reincarnation. But Frank's teaching led his sect immediately into scandalous practices. And of course, at that point, the Ottoman Empire authorities were starting to investigate him. And due to the fact that he didn't want to simply be the representative of, when they chose him, the Sabbateans, the Domme, chose him as the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi, so the follow-up to Baruch Russo, he didn't want this. He said that he didn't feel that being the successor of Baruch Russo was enough for him. So that was what happened. At that point, he decided that there was something else he could do. Baruch Russo died in 1720. Okay, so the fact that there was still within the Sabbatean movement in Thessaloniki, which, like I repeat, is a very important place, because that's where the merchants of the Sabbatean merchants really made their success. They started to establish also the banking cartel.
Where is this? Where are we talking exactly?
It is in modern day Turkey, but it was at the time the Ottoman Empire. So it was
still in Turkey. Okay.
Okay. The Ottoman Empire, let's say, because modern day Turkey is a different thing from Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire was extended all the way into Europe, almost arriving to we know that, of course, they were stopped and they couldn't manage to get Vienna. Otherwise, probably the history of Europe would be very different today. But in any case, a very young Jacob Frank becomes the reincarnation, becomes fixated with the idea he's the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi, but it's not a question of becoming, fixated. It's a question of being accepted by the people who represent Shabbatai Zevi. And they accepted the reincarnation as something that was a practice. So once he went through some trials, a little bit like the lamas of Tibet, recognizing your own objects or this and that, he was accepted within the fold as the reincarnation. But that wasn't enough for him. He thought the Domme, who had externally converted to Islam, were not enough for him. In reality, his answer was to go back from where he came, so back to modern-day Ukraine and Poland, and instead convert to the Catholic faith outwards instead of Islam, and start a whole new Sabbatean concept by involving in the Sabbatean heresy many more Jews within the communities which were based in modern-day Moldova, Ukraine, Western Ukraine mainly, but also other parts, Poland, Hungary, and of course later on also Germany, and then it became also Austria became a hotbed because of the spreading of this heresy. So Jacob Frank abandoned the Domme abandoned the idea that this heretical practice had to be limited to the Jewish world within the Ottoman Empire. He wanted to expand it, and his idea was actually very successful. He arrived back. At that point, though, he was also being monitored very closely by the rabbinical authorities. I mean, the rabbis were starting to be worried. Rabbis from Amsterdam, from Prague, from other parts of Europe. That Dr. Falk we discussed earlier, he himself got persecuted, and that's why he moved to England and London, because these people, they were not. I mean, the Ashkenazi, for example, in particular, started with some of their most eminent rabbis to investigate this heresy and bring to the trial in front of the rabbinical courts these heretics. However, they were very clever, I must say, because Jacob Frank managed to bring 20,000 Jewish converts to the Catholic faith. And that was seen by the Jesuits and by the Catholic Church as wow, this is a big thing, Now, initially, Jacob Frank wanted these converts to only marry with each other, stay with each other, but then it kind of drew the attention of both the rabbinical authorities and the Inquisition. So then the next move was simply to embrace marrying into the most established and noble families of Europe. So they started to infiltrate left, right, and center. First, the black aristocrats close to the Vatican, and the various aristocrats in Poland, in Austria, and so on. And then they moved into infiltrating also the aristocracy in Anglican England. And they were very successful because the Sabbatean Frankists were very adaptable. They adapted very, very easily to whatever outwards fate they. There is one guy who in this book of mine really is one of the I think the icons of this transformation. A guy who was many things in his life. He was born in Hungary, a Jew, and then he became, at the end of his life, even a Chinese habot. He went through being a Nazi spy, influential even with Adolf Hitler at the very early ages of Nazism. He went from being an Anglican priest close to the Bishop of Canterbury to being a missionary here in Canada. I mean, this guy was many things. Ignaz Trebisch Lincoln. And even his name is a construct, of course, because Lincoln is based on the President Lincoln, who was himself a disciple of Pascal Beverly Randolph, who himself in turn was a disciple of another Sabbatean Frankist. So Max Theon, who influenced also Madame Blavatsky, the very basis of everything that we have in modern Satanism or from Theosophy onwards is all influenced by the Sabbatean Frankists. And they had their own holy book of sorts, which was very important, and I explained. But I think that the most important thing is to explain to people that there were numerous outbreaks of followers of Sabbatai Zev in eastern Poland, now Ukraine, particularly in Podolia and Galicia. The moment in which, though, you understand, their own guy came into the fold, Jacob Frank, they were really proud of the fact. It wasn't some guy who was raised in Smyrna, in Turkey. It was a guy who actually had to flee these areas to go to, so it made them particularly proud. So Jacob Frank amplified the Sabbatean heresy in places like Lviv in Ukraine. It's quite, I think also it's quite incredible that the Sabbatean heresy spread in those areas where now you have war and conflict with the President Volodymyr Zelensky, who obviously is not a practicing Jew, who comes from the very tradition of the Sabbatean Frankists of being secularized. Theodor Herzl, the founder of of what we know as the Zionist movement, himself was a product of that secularized Sabbatean Frankist ideal that then became the basis for the Jewish Enlightenment. And that's why when Theodor Herzl created the Zionist movement, let's not forget that he had to really put together the different realities in Judaism that go from the Hasidic Orthodox ones to the secularized ones who viewed the practices of certain Jews, or even the Ashkenazi viewing the certain Sephardi Jews as primitive. I cite in my book, I cite Frank Kafka, who after going to an Hasidic ritual said, who are these, basically these buffoons, he thought they were like some kind of tribe from ancient, from Africa, I call them. Something like that. I mean, he was really insulted towards, so the Jews who were modernized saw other kinds of Jews as being primitive. And the thing that people don't understand that is really behind that big drama, which is the Shoah, known also as the Holocaust, is that the Sabbatean Frankists hated the Jews who didn't embrace their heresy. They were all expendable for them. And unfortunately, the result was that in the end, whoever they fought was not okay. Who is it that ended up in the concentration camps? That's what we need to understand here. Is those Jews who didn't go to Israel in the first place, who didn't jump on the immediate offer of Rothschild and company after the Balfour Declaration, and those Jews wanted to stay in their countries. They wanted to stay in Germany, they wanted to stay in Poland, they wanted to stay in their countries. Where did they ended up?
Yeah. Such an important point. And we have multiple times of, so-called false flags, but very real, bombings and attacks on Jewish towns and cities of like Sephardic Jews, of different cultural Jews,
I mean,
that are done by Israel, done by the Israeli Zionists, against their own people to force them to move to Israel. This is after the Holocaust,
and
right?
once they moved
to round a few last up, and they were constantly killing their own people. I mean, it was constantly, and it still is, honestly.
I mean, up until the 1984 book written by Edwin Black, the Jews didn't really want to discuss the transfer agreement, because that book documents the agreement between Nazi Germany and the German Zionists in 1933 to salvage, in their eyes, the German Jewish assets. But then we see that, for example, there was a number of Jewish organizations before that time, and then suddenly there's only one organization. It's like basically the labor Zionists managed to become the ones who really did the deal with the devil, because you are doing a deal with Adolf Hitler, who just came to power. And the B'nai Brit, which was this paramasonic organization, ignored any action. They didn't take any action. The Jews, the majority of the Jews here in America and other communities around the world, wanted to take action even before Hitler came to power to stop what they saw might have become very dangerous. Instead, the B'nai Brit decided to not take any action, to look on the other side. And that's why I explained that the real meaning of B'nai Brit, Rabbi Antelman taught, was Sabbatai is my illumination. That was B'nai Brit means. They are a Sabbatean Frankist organization, and today they are the number one fraternal organization of Jews in the world. So the transfer agreement rescued some 60,000 German Jews, of course. the worldwide economic boycott of German Jews helped spur a deal between the Nazis and Zionists, meaning that if the B'nai Brit had condemned Adolf Hitler and Germany, they would not have gone very far. Looking on the other side, basically meant the facilitation, the implementation, and those Jews who wanted to come to America at one point or wanted to go to England would be sent back to their country and said, you need to go to Israel. So now today, you see, we are in front of a general condemnation of Israel and of the people of Israel, who are the first victims of the Sabbatean Frankists, because they are not to blame for having been pushed into colonizing a country that was built by these people. And then, people nowadays say, from the river to the sea, we want to, Palestine should be free. Listen, guys, the problem here is very big, because these two people ethnically have the right to be there. Both people. I'm not saying only the Jews, also the Arabs, okay?
Christians.
Eh?
Let's throw Christians in there. They get left out.
Well, when I say Arabs, I don't say Muslims or Christians. It's Arab. But then we have those Arabs, there is Christians and there is Muslims. So I'm just said the race, not the religion. But they all have because the race is the identity, the DNA that connects them to those, not the religion necessarily, which can change at the flick of a, because, Gaza was a Christian Jewish bastion, then Saladin arrived and forced them to convert. So, I mean, it's like, up until that day, there was no Muslims. Until Islam was invented, there was, so we need to be distinct in that thing. So today, both the Jews as well as the Arabs have the rights to be there. But the problem here is, once you have all this hate, and once you have the within the Jewish world, this sect, that their main thing is to get everybody to hate the Jews, because that's what they did already back in the days of at the beginning of that tragedy, the Holocaust. They're doing the same thing today. You understand? So by the actions that people like Benjamin Netanyahu is from the Likud party. The Likud party is another creation of the Sabbatean Frankists, like I demonstrate in my book, that started with this gentleman here. This gentleman here, who is called Ze'ev Jabotinsky, the Zionist leader and founder of the Zionist revisionist movement. So at the end of the day, after Theodor Herzl put together these various different anime, we would say in Italy, different souls of the Jewish world, to actually get along and push them, though he died, and then after it was about, much later we have the foundation of Israel. But in his idea, putting together all these different forms of the Jewish world, these different Jewish identities had to get along in order to create a state of Israel. So that was the idea of the Zionist movement. So in my book, I explained that the Zionist movement is a compromise of the opposites, because you find, the revisionist Zionist who is inspirational for the Likud party, and then you have the labor Zionist who is inspirational to the foundation of now the modern, the Democrats down the call. But before that, there was the labor Zionist of Ehud Barak, the guy who savagely raped Virginia Giuffre. So the fact that this book brings you to the acknowledgement that in Little St. James there is some direct references to the Sabbateans.
Explain that. And with this, we only have about 10 minutes or so left. So explain what you just said. And as you mentioned in Ehud Barak and Giuffre referencing the prime minister who raped and beat her, and getting back to Epstein and maybe a tad bit also into their Eastern European families, like what you brought up in the beginning. If you round it out here at the end. We have to read the book, so you don't want to give away everything.
Yeah,
but just to tie it up in a conclusion.
Yeah, in a nutshell, I can say that there will not be that Jeffrey Epstein was the construct of a very elaborate and very knowledgeable group of people like Robert Maxwell himself. In my book, I explained Robert Maxwell's real name was completely another name, and he then decided to call himself Robert Maxwell after he was naturalized English. But Robert Maxwell was also from the same areas of Podolia, and in fact, his name was Jan Ludwig Iman Benjamin Hock. And he decided to call himself Robert Maxwell simply because Maxwell Knight was his spying master ring, the spy master of his ring of spies that were operating at that time. Maxwell Knight was a very famous spy, but he was also a guy who was linked to Aleister Crowley, by the way. And Robert Maxwell was a guy who was always linked with the KGB for the whole course of his life. And I explain, of course, in this book why there was this link and what did the Sabbatean Frankists do within the Soviet Union. So that is something that I leave for the people who read the book, of course. But going back to Ghislaine Maxwell, the father was the one who, of course, introduced her to Jeffrey Epstein. And Jeffrey Epstein was the guy who was constructed by these people, which included Les Wexner, Robert Maxwell, Donald Barr, and many others who are simply the modern heirs to the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. I mean, the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, Gershom Scholem talks about the last official document that here in the United States we find ascribed to a Sabbatean Frankist at the end of the 19th century. But having said that, then he found traces of the Sabbatean Frankist still in the 1920s with this figure in particular, which I'm going to show to you. The liberal intellectual and advisor Alice Godmar Brandes. Do you know who is this person here?
No, I can't really see it that well, but
okay, Alice Godmark Brandes.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Yes.
The husband was a member of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And she was an advocate of all those causes which we call liberal and progressive. And she was, in fact, an open advocate who talked about Jacob Frank and the Sabbatean Frankists. She actually talked about them. She was somebody who admired them and vocally said that he was inspirational.
Yes.
So I mean, this is not like, and there is many other examples. And then when we analyze all these people, we analyze what Les Wexner did. Les Wexner, guys, I mean, in my book, of course, you will read about him and stuff, but I mean, it's like they simply picked up this very clever guy in the middle of the 70s from a Sabbatean Frankist background. Sabbatean Frankist background often can be even not formal but informal. The product of the Sabbatean Frankist in the end is the secular Jew who is progressive, liberal, and Jeffrey Epstein was always a liberal, always a progressive, never a conservative.
And not necessarily Jewish at all is the other thing as far as this group. I mean, you can have Frankists that aren't Jewish. And
okay, that is another thing that I touch in this book. Of course, I will leave it to the readers of the book, but I also show, and this is not because I just concocted out of fantasy, but I worked with a journalist who I co-wrote a book back in the days in Italy. Ferruccio Pinotti is one of the chief investigative journalists of the Corriere della Sera, which is the most read Italian newspaper, and he actually complimented me for this book the other day. But with him, he had done some research back in the days that proven that very foundation of the Bank of Italy, of the Mediobanca, Enrico Cuccia, and before that, it was all connected to the Sabbatean Frankists. And there were people like Mattioli, who was then called the honorary Jewish banker, who was himself a guy who who was also connected to the Sabbatean Frankists. I mean, this is, like I said, these are testimonies about this kind of people. Let me show you here some Sabbatean Frankists, like Enrico Cuccia. Enrico Cuccia was called the high priest of Italian capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
A banker of the bankers. This other guy, Mattioli. These are not Jews. But when Enrico Cuccia died, even the mainstream newspapers, when his body was stolen for a few weeks, they started to talk about the Sabbatean Frankists who thought of themselves superior and all that in the Italian newspapers.
Yes.
And then there is this guy here, French-born banker André Benoît Mathieu. You know who is this guy?
No, just tell me, because we're getting
Very
closer.
quickly.
Go ahead,
Advisor
because
to
I can't read it.
Advisor to Lyndon Johnson, advisor to Jackie Onassis, the Kennedy family, a guy who was called by Kennedy the most, David Rockefeller called this guy the most genius man in the history of banking.
There you go.
So there you go. So these are not names that you can find in any other book, but this book that gives you the name with the receipts, with the certified sources that are not out of thin air, and that give us in the end an understanding that we are all being played, and we are in a system that is highly rigged, and the moment you arrive in Washington DC, you are basically in their hands. So check out this book, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world. Is out now.
I will link it below. I'm so excited to read it myself, Leo, and it sounds
Please
fantastic.
read it, because I think that after you read it, we need a second interview just to make a point of what you have read. Because
then I will be
today we have just scratched the surface, really.
Yes, I'll be digging in and interrupting you constantly. But what I will just point out here at the end is, it's so important to understand that whole system of, blackmail, connected with sexual perversion, the organization of it, okay, is so pervasive.
But it was also, you see, used by the Sabbatean Frankists to manipulate even the intelligence agencies. Like today, people think that Jeffrey Epstein was the ultimate product of those intelligence agencies, that he was working for Mossad, he was working for the CIA. No, it is. These agencies don't count, and these agencies are workers, people who change with politics, that change with whoever is in power, who obey to whoever is influential and controls them.
Right.
And instead, the Sabbatean Frankists, they control the money, and money talks in this world. And that's why in this world, there is two forces which I've always denounced in my books, and it's the Jesuits and the Sabbatean Frankists. And in this book, I also show that the link is very strong between the Jesuits, when they were persecuted, where they took refuge in Podolia.
Yeah.
So that's it. Enjoy the reading.
Fantastic.
I'll be waiting for more comments and more.
Yes, I will call you as soon as I finish.
Future.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Everybody go ahead and buy it. And Leo, I'll let you go. I know you're on a marathon of interviews right now. We know it's going to hit up a #1. They always do. I'm so excited. So thank you. And
it's already a book that is #1 in the history of Judaism. It's probably also gonna be big with I saw with espionage accounts and biographies of sorts. But of course, it's very challenging to be a guy who is breaking this kind of information, not being a Jew, to the Jewish world. It's the first time, because you see, in the past there were people like Rabbi Antelman, my late friend Barry Kamish. There was, of course, Gershon Scholem or other academics, Jewish academics. But I'm not born a Jew. My Jewish blood is minimal. And I've actually, though I have Ashkenazi blood, though I have actually some roots, they are very remote in time. And I did this mainly because I think that regardless of me being a Jew, I will be able to help the Jews and the people who live in Israel understanding who are the real enemies.
So important. It's so important. I mean, and I'm just so excited that it is happening, you know, that it looks like there's a breakthrough coming, and books like yours are so vital in this historical time. I'm so thankful for it, Leo. So leozagami.com, and also link below where you can order the book, and we're going to keep pushing those numbers up, Leo. I'm really excited. Thank you so much.
All
God
the
bless
best.
you, and
Take
I'll see you
care.
soon.
God bless
All
you.
right.
Shalom.
Shalom. Oh, that's fantastic. I just love interviewing Leo Zagami. leozagami.com, link for the book below, and share this video, please. Let's get the word out. What I said there at the end, talking to him, is exactly what I feel, that it's so important to get the information out to liberate the people that are, you know, the Jews living today that are so against everything that's going on. Against what has been done to them as a people, as what is going on in the world, the billionaire elite banking cabal, and the destruction of Christianity. Basically, you know, the total, what he says, the heresy against the Torah and the rules of Judaism. And so, you know, it's just so vital, because we're being thrown at this like red green alliance thing where, oh, it's Islam versus Jews, and, you know, and the destruction of Christianity. It's like, no, this is all a construct. And you could hear from what Leo was saying how far it goes back and how interconnected the power players are. And I mean, you can go on and on. I mean, David Icke does a great job in some of his older books as well, getting back into the far reaches of how Islam and the banker elite of the Frankists, you know, are so intertwined in the creation of the Saudi dynasty and these uber wealthy Muslim families, the creation of Islam, all of it. So anyway, we're going to wind up. But thank you so much for watching. If you found this video as added value and you want to support the channel to help me keep doing more videos, more interviews with Leo, I'm going to be ordering that book today, and we'll be back up together in a couple weeks. And just so I can do more videos, period, during the week, please support the channel, share the video, please, and like the video. Super shadow banned, and you can imagine why. And so God bless you. As I said before, let's pray for the protection of the children across the holidays here of what is generally a very sacred day, being, of course, inverted, reversals upon reversals, biggest lies to make it into a high satanic holiday, and the sacrifice of children. And remember that it is Christianity that abolished child sacrifice and continues to be the most stalwart fighter against the harm of children. So, all right, we'll leave it there, folks. You are free, TGIF, and I will see you Monday.